The weapon had no name in any language that had ever been written down, because every language it had ever been used against had ceased to exist within 72 hours of deployment, and dead languages do not name things. The Sorati hegemony called it the unwriting, privately, in documents that were never shared with the Galactic Assembly, and never would be, because the Assembly had explicit prohibitions against exactly this category of weapon. Prohibitions with teeth. Real teeth. The kind of teeth that ended civilizations rather than sanctioning them, which was why the Sorati had been careful, extraordinarily careful, about which civilizations they had tested the unwriting against. They chose species with no allies, species at the edge of mapped space, species whose disappearance could be explained by other means. Stellar catastrophe, disease, the ordinary attrition of civilizations that had not yet reached full galactic integration. 7 species in 40 years. 7 civilizations erased, not from existence, but from history. Not destroyed, but unwoven. The matter remained, the stars remained, the planets remained, but the record of who had lived there dissolved from every archive, every memory, every quantum imprint, and every piece of matter that had ever been touched by those civilizations. The Sorati were patient. Te were also, by the standards of most assembly species, brilliant. Their understanding of quantum information theory was the deepest in the known galaxy, developed across 3,000 years of focused research, motivated by the specific goal of doing exactly what the unwriting did. Quantum information, the deepest physics teaches, is never truly destroyed. It is scrambled, redistributed, rendered inaccessible. But the information that described a thing persists in some form in the fabric of space, recorded in the entanglement relationships of every particle that thing ever interacted with. The unwriting did not destroy that information. It did something more elegant and more terrible. It coherently inverted the quantum records, replacing the information of a civilization's existence with information describing its absence, propagating the inversion through the entanglement network faster than any response could be organized. 7 civilizations, gone from the record, not dead, never having been. The Assembly did not notice because the Assembly's records did not record them, had never recorded them, showed no gap where they had been, because the gap itself had been filled with the smooth fabric of a history in which they had never existed. The Sorati turned their attention to humanity in year 41 of the program. The decision was the most consequential they had ever made, and most of the people who made it would not survive to understand why. Smash the like button right now if this opening has already told you that this story is going to be unlike anything you have heard before. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. And share this with every science fiction fan you know, because what humanity built to protect against exactly this is going to change everything. The Sorati chose humanity for specific reasons that their Strategic Planning Committee documented in a classified report titled Analysis of Human Threat Potential and Recommended Timeline for Preemptive Historical Erasure. The report was thorough. It cited humanity's expansion rate, their military capability development curve, their demonstrated tendency to form alliances with species the Sorati considered strategically problematic, and their consistent pattern of intervening in situations that the Sorati had preferred to leave uninterrupted. The report also cited something that the Strategic Planning Committee found unusual enough to flag in a separate section: anomalous quantum readings from the Sol system, detected by Sorati long-range instruments over the previous 30 years. The anomalous readings were not consistent with any known natural phenomenon or any known technology. They appeared to be quantum entanglement events of extraordinary density and complexity, centered on Earth, but extending throughout the Sol system and into nearby interstellar space. The committee's quantum physics specialist had analyzed the readings for 8 months before submitting her assessment, which said, "I cannot fully characterize what these readings represent. They are consistent with, but more complex than, any known artificial quantum information system. I recommend caution." The Strategic Planning Committee noted the recommendation and overrode it. The unwriting had worked 7 times against civilizations that their instruments had described as quantum. Anomalous readings did not constitute a reason to deviate from a proven approach. They deployed the unwriting against Earth on a Tuesday morning, Sol Standard Time, using a delivery mechanism that propagated the inversion wave through the quantum vacuum at a rate that should have made organized response impossible. Should have. What happened in the first 72 hours after deployment was documented in the Sorathi's own monitoring systems, because they always monitored their deployments. and the documentation was, in the measured language of scientific reporting, the most alarming document in the hegemony's 41-year history of the program. The unwriting hit the Sol system's quantum information substrate at precisely the calculated propagation rate, reaching Earth's quantum information layer at hour 4 with 100% of design destructive coherence, exactly as modeled. And then something happened that the model had not predicted. The inversion wave met not physical resistance, not electromagnetic resistance, quantum resistance. The inversion wave struck the Sol system's quantum information substrate and encountered a counterstructure of such density and complexity that the wave did not propagate through it, but fractured against it, like a wave striking a seawall, built of the same substance as the wave itself. The monitoring systems recorded it in real time. The Cerati quantum physics teams watching the feeds went completely silent for approximately 90 seconds, the way people go silent when the universe produces data that falls outside every category they have built for understanding the universe. Then the counterstructure began to push back. Like and subscribe right now because the quantum anchors are about to reveal themselves, and this is the moment the entire story turns. Hit that share button right now and stay with us, because we are only at the beginning of what humanity built. The quantum anchor network had been begun 147 years before the Cerati deployed the unravel by a theoretical physicist named Dr. Yunosato, who had published, to considerable academic skepticism, a paper titled Quantum Historical Preservation, a theoretical framework for civilizational permanence against information-based threats. The paper had been written in response to a different threat than the unwriting. It had been written in response to the detection, by Dr. Sato and a small team of colleagues, of evidence that one of the Assembly's older member civilizations had simply ceased to have a history. Not ceased to exist. Ceased to have a history. Their records were present, but had the specific quality of records that had been rebuilt from secondary sources, with gaps at the primary level that Dr. Sato's instruments could measure even if their content could not be recovered. Someone, Dr. Sato concluded, had done something to that civilization's quantum information record. She could not prove it. She did not have evidence that would satisfy a scientific standard of proof, but she was a physicist who understood quantum information at a level that few other minds in the Assembly had reached, and she knew what she was looking at. She looked at it for 3 years. She published her paper in year 4. The paper was received with the polite skepticism reserved for theoretical frameworks that propose threats that nobody has yet observed, solutions that require extraordinary infrastructure investment. The skepticism did not stop. Dr. Sato, she was 61 years old when she published the paper, and she was in excellent health and had a specific quality of patience that her colleagues described affectionately as the patience of someone who is completely certain they are right and is willing to wait as long as necessary for everyone else to catch up. She went to governments. She went to universities. She went to the private sector, which had recently become very large and very capable and which was, in her assessment, more likely to act on theoretical threats than governments, because governments required evidence and corporations required only opportunity. She found, eventually, a coalition of humans who were willing to listen, which was not surprising, because humanity had a long history of building large things in response to theoretical threats, as several members of the Galactic Assembly had discovered to their considerable educational benefit. The coalition was small at first, 12 researchers, 2 private funding sources, and a government department that preferred to remain unnamed in the documentation, and whose involvement was logged under a budget line that translated to miscellaneous infrastructure research. They began building. Not fast. Not visibly, with the patient deliberateness of people who understood that what they were building had to work not next year, but in some indefinite future when something attacked the quantum record of human history, and that patience now meant capability then. The quantum anchor network was in its physical form, distributed across the Sol system in installations that had been disguised as variously astronomical observation platforms, communications relay stations, asteroid mining infrastructure, and in one case, a research base studying the thermal dynamics of the Jovian atmosphere. Each anchor was a quantum entanglement generation and preservation system of extraordinary sophistication, capable of creating and maintaining quantum links between the information substrate of its local physical environment and a reference frame that was, by the design of the system, outside the reach of any known quantum inversion technology. The reference frame was the clever part. Dr. Sato had spent 12 years developing the theoretical basis for it, and another 8 years working out the engineering before the first prototype had been tested. The reference frame was not in normal spacetime. It was in the quantum vacuum itself, at a level of physical reality below the threshold where quantum inversion waves propagated. In a region that Dr. Sato described in her technical documentation as the bedrock layer of information reality, the quantum anchors linked the historical information of every event in human experience to this bedrock layer, not copies. Links. Unbreakable connections between the quantum record of what had happened and a substrate that no known weapon could touch, because no known weapon could reach the bedrock layer. No known weapon. As of the day Dr. Sato filed her original theoretical framework, the unwriting was not known. The unwriting operated at exactly the layer of quantum information that the anchors were designed to preserve, and when the unwriting hit the Sol system's quantum information substrate, it did not find an unprotected record waiting to be inverted. It found 147 years of quantum anchoring, dense, beyond any Serati modal's prediction, linked to a bedrock layer that the unwriting could not reach, could not touch, could not invert. It found a record that fought back. Subscribe to the channel right now, because what happens when a quantum anchor network fights back is something no Serati physicist had ever imagined. Like this video, to help it reach more people, and share it. Because this story is about to go somewhere extraordinary. The counterpropagation that the Serati monitoring systems recorded in the hours following the failed inversion was not a designed feature of the quantum anchor network. Dr. Sato had not designed the anchors to attack. She had designed them to preserve. But preservation, when it encounters inversion, has a natural consequence in quantum physics that Dr. Sato had modeled theoretically, and that none of the subsequent generations of anchor engineers had ever expected to see demonstrated at operational scale. When a quantum inversion wave encounters a fully anchored information substrate, the inversion wave does not simply fail. It fails in a specific way. The coherence of the inversion wave inverts against the anchored reference, producing a counter-coherence that propagates back along the inversion wave's own path. A reverse unwriting, not designed. Physics. The same physics that made the unwriting work applied to the unwriting itself, using the anchored record of human history as the coherence reference. The Serati monitoring systems tracked the counter-propagation for 11 hours before the lead monitor. A physicist named Selvar, who was the foremost unwriting specialist in the hegemony, stood up from her console and walked to the Strategic Planning Committee's session room and said something that nobody had ever said in that room before. She said, "We need to abort. We need to abort now. The counterpropagation is following our delivery mechanism's quantum signature back to its source. And if it reaches source, it will do to our records what we attempted to do to theirs," the committee chair said. "That's not possible. The unwriting has never counterpropagated. 7 previous deployments produced no counterpropagation," Selvar said. 7 previous deployments encountered quantum-inert civilizations with no anchor infrastructure. This deployment encountered something that has been building anchor infrastructure for 147 years, and we did not know it existed, she said. "I am telling you that the physics of what is happening in the Sol system is going to reach us in approximately 31 hours unless we sever the delivery mechanism's quantum entanglement signature right now. And severing will require destroying 3 hegemony quantum relay stations at significant operational costs," the committee chair said. "You're saying their defense is turning our weapon against us," Selvar said. "I'm saying the physics of their defense cannot help but turn our weapon against us. It is not a choice they made. It is a consequence of their design interacting with our weapon in a way that produces a counterwave. They may not even know it is happening." She paused. "Or they may know exactly. I do not know how deeply they understood what they were building, but I know what the physics says is happening, and I am telling you we have approximately 30 hours. The committee authorized the severance. 3 hegemony quantum relay stations were destroyed in the following 6 hours. A sacrifice of infrastructure that cost the hegemony a decade of capability in 2 strategic sectors, and the counterpropagation was cut from its guidance path and dissipated into the quantum vacuum. The Sol system's Anchor Network, reading the severance of the inversion wave's quantum signature, completed its counter-propagation routine against the Nosevered signin and then did something that had not been designed into its protocols, but that emerged from its operational logic as a natural next step. It began recording. Hit like right now. If the physics of a civilization's history fighting back against a weapon designed to erase it is giving you exactly the feeling you came to this video for. Subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss a video, and share this with everyone you know. Because what the Anchor Network recorded is what matters next. The Quantum Anchor Network had been designed to preserve human history. Preservation meant recording. Recording meant that the network's sensors, which operated at the bedrock layer of quantum information where the anchors were embedded, had detected everything the unwriting had done, not just to the Sol system. The unwriting was a quantum phenomenon, and quantum phenomena leave traces at the bedrock layer. Traces that the network's instruments could read the way a seismograph reads the traces of distant earthquakes. Not directly, but inferentially. The network had detected 7 previous traces, 7 deployments, each with a specific quantum signature that identified the delivery mechanism, the origination point, and the characteristics of the inversion wave. 7 civilizations that the Assembly's records did not know had ever existed. The network presented this data to its human operators through the monitoring system that Dr. Sato's descendants had built and maintained across 147 years, and the operators. A team of 7 quantum physicists on rotating duty at the network's primary interface station reviewed it with the methodical attention of people who had spent their careers preparing for exactly this. The lead monitor was a woman named Dr. Asha Reyes, 44 years old, second-generation anchor engineer, trained by a mother who had been trained by a teacher who had been trained in a lineage that traced back for generations to the original coalition that Dr. Unisato had assembled. Asha Reyes reviewed the data for 6 hours without sleeping, not because she was required to, but because she was a physicist facing the most significant data set in the history of her field, and sleep did not seem like the appropriate response to that situation. At the end of 6 hours, she had a complete picture. 7 erased civilizations, their quantum traces recovered from the bedrock layer by the network's instruments. Their existence proven by physics, even though every accessible record in the observable universe said they had never been there. She had the Serati hegemony's quantum delivery mechanism, signature, specific and unique. The equivalent of a fingerprint on a weapon, and she had the knowledge that the unwriting had been deployed against Earth and had failed, which meant that whoever had deployed it knew it had failed, which meant that they were going to try again, or try something else, or make decisions in the next hours based on what they had learned from the failure. Asha Reyes made a decision of her own. She did not consult her chain of command first, which was technically a protocol violation in which she was prepared to defend on the grounds that the chain of command would have taken 6 hours to convene, and she did not have 6 hours. She sent a message. Not to Earth's government, not to Sol Defense Command, to the Galactic Assembly's Anomalous Phenomena Commission, which she had a direct contact channel with, because the network's existence had been formally registered with the Commission 4 years earlier. Classified but registered, because Dr. Sato's original coalition had decided long ago that being invisible was less safe than being known to the right people. The message said, "We have evidence of quantum information warfare at deployment against the Sol system and against 7 previously unknown civilizations. We have physical evidence of the perpetrator's identity. We need a commission emergency session within 12 hours. We have the proof." She attached the data package. The commission's duty officer who received the message read it again, reviewed the attached data package long enough to understand what she was looking at, and escalated it to priority read within 40 seconds, which was the fastest escalation in commission history. Subscribe to the channel right now because the Assembly is about to receive the most important data package in its history. Like this video to help this story reach more people, and share it because the 7 civilizations that the Serati erased deserve to be known. The commissioned emergency session convened in 9 hours, not 12. Because 9 hours was how long it took for the necessary people to reach the station and for the data package to be distributed and partially reviewed by the people who needed to walk into the session already understanding what it contained. The session was attended by 27 species representatives, the Commission's full analysis team, 3 Assembly legal scholars, and 1 human Dr. Asha Reyes, who had been brought from the network's interface station to Earth orbit. To this session in a transport that had been pulled from another assignment without explanation, which was the kind of thing that happened when something reached priority red before it had been formally named. She stood at the center of the session chamber and presented the data, not summarized, in full technical detail, with the patience of someone who understood that the people receiving this data needed to understand it at the physics level, not just the political level, because the political decisions that followed would be built on the physics. The 7 erased civilizations. Their quantum trace, the proof of their existence at the bedrock layer, recovered by instruments that operated below the threshold of the unwriting's reach. The Serati delivery signature, the deployment against Earth, the failure, the counterpropagation and its severance. The Assembly's senior physicist, a Thurvany named Vosel, who had been in the field for 45 years, and who had the specific quality of professional stillness that came from decades of encountering extraordinary things and processing them before reacting. Ask the first question, he said. The 7 civilizations, their traces are recoverable? Asha said. The bedrock layer quantum tracers are recoverable, not their records, not their history in the sense of events and people and decisions. The fact of their existence, the quantum signatures of their matter interactions with the universe, which prove they were there, he said. Is that enough to identify them? To restore some record of who they were? She said. Not alone. But it's a foundation. Every piece of matter in the regions of space they inhabited still carries entanglement relationships with them at the bedrock level. Given enough analysis, given the right instruments, we can potentially recover significant portions of their history, he said. How long would that take? She said. Decades. Possibly a century. We would essentially be reading quantum memory from matter that has not been read in 41 years, through the bedrock layer, using instruments that would need to be purpose-built for the task. She paused. It is possible. My team can do it, given the resources. We built a network to preserve the same principles that preserve can recover, with the right application and enough time. The room was quiet for a moment. Then, the Quelari representative, a woman who had been sitting with her hands pressed together since the data presentation began, said, You're saying you can give them back? Asha said, I'm saying we can try. The physics supports it. The question is whether the Assembly supports the effort. The Thurvany physicist said, What's the cost of not trying? Asha said, 7 civilizations that the universe knows existed at the bedrock level and that we choose to leave in silence. Because the recovery is difficult, the Serati chose silence for them. We have the option not to, she said. I think we should exercise that option. Hit like if Asha, Reyes just became one of your favorite characters in any science fiction story you have ever heard. Subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss what we create. And share this video because the 7 lost civilizations deserve every person who hears their story. The Assembly did not vote on the Serati question in the emergency session. They tabled it, briefly, while the legal scholars reviewed the evidence against the Assembly's existing frameworks for quantum information warfare, which were sparse, because quantum information warfare had been theoretical until 48 hours ago. Sparse frameworks received emergency supplementation in the following 72 hours, because the Assembly had been built across 400 years. By people who understood that, when the universe produces new categories of threat, institutional frameworks need to grow to meet them. The Serati question was addressed at a formal session 5 days after the emergency session, in a chamber that was fuller than it had been at any session in a decade, with every Assembly species represented, because the data package had circulated, and everyone had read it, and everyone understood what they were there to decide. The Serati hegemony's delegation arrived at the session knowing what it contained, because the data package had been shared with them through diplomatic channels 48 hours before the session, as the Assembly's protocols required. Their chief delegate, a senior diplomat named Veth Soren, who had been in the position for 18 years, and who had the particular stillness of someone who is known for a long time that a difficult day was coming and has spent the intervening time deciding how to be when it arrived, sat at the delegation's table without speaking until the session chair formally invited response. The session chair was a Thurvany elder named Councillor Vothmar, who had presided over more difficult sessions than any other in the Assembly's current membership, and who had read the data package with the quiet attention of someone receiving information that changes the shape of the world they thought they were living in. He invited the Serati to respond. Vetsoran stood. She did not deny anything. The data was physics, and physics did not permit denial. And she had known that when she arrived, and she had made the decision that honesty, in this context, was the only position that preserved any future for the hegemony. She said, the Serati hegemony acknowledges the accuracy of the data presented to this assembly. We acknowledge the deployment of quantum information warfare against the Sol system and against 7 species whose identities we will fully disclose to this assembly's investigation team, she said. We acknowledge that this constitutes a violation of assembly frameworks that we have been members of for 160 years, and we acknowledge that the consequences of that violation are for this assembly to determine, she said. We ask one thing, not as a negotiation, as a request from a species that has done something that cannot be undone, and that understands the weight of that. We ask to participate in the recovery effort, to help restore what we erased, not as penance, though it is that, as the only meaningful act that remains available to us. The session was quiet for a long time after she sat down. Then the Quelari representative said, You erased 7 civilizations. You tried to erase humanity. You are asking to help recover the 7. Beth Soren said. Yes. The Quelari representative said. Why should we believe? That is genuine, Beth Soren said. Because we built the weapon that was used. We know its mechanics at a depth that no other species in this assembly currently possesses. We know what we did to those 7 civilizations at the technical level, which means we know more about what was done to them than anyone else, which means we have knowledge that the recovery effort needs, she said. I am not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to be useful in the one act that has any moral weight in this situation, which is to give back what we took. Subscribe to the channel right now because Vetsoren just said something that is going to echo through the rest of this story. Like this video to show us you are here for every moment of this. And share this video because the Assembly is about to make a decision that matters. The Assembly voted. The sanctions against the Serati hegemony were the most severe in Assembly history. A documented response to a documented atrocity, carefully calibrated by the legal scholars to be proportionate to what had been done while preserving the possibility of the hegemony's eventual reintegration. The sanctions were not the Assembly's most important decision that day. The most important decision was the one that established the Recovery Commission, tasked with the decades-long effort to restore the quantum historical records of the 7 erased civilizations, using the Anchor Network's instruments. The Serati's technical knowledge, and whatever resources the Assembly could bring to bear. Asha Reyes was appointed to lead the technical team. She accepted with the specific quality of seriousness that came from someone who had spent their career building a system for this moment, and who now had to deliver on what the system promised. Her first act as technical lead was to call her mother. Her mother, Dr. Priya Reyes, 69 years old, second generation anchor engineer who had trained Asha and who had retired 18 months earlier after 43 years of service, received the call at home and listened to her daughter describe what had happened with the calm attention of someone who had spent for years believing exactly this was possible and who was not surprised but who was very quietly overwhelmed. Asha said, I need you back. Not permanently. For the recovery project, the technical challenges are going to exceed what the current team can handle alone in, the deep bedrock layer. Instruments better than anyone, her mother said. Of course. 2 words. Of course. The way it is said by someone for whom the question of whether to return was never in doubt, for whom the consideration of personal inconvenience was simply not part of the calculation, for whom the work was the work and the work needed doing. The recovery project began formally 90 days after the assembly session, with a team of 43 humans and 29 scientists from 11 other species, working from a dedicated station in the outer Sol system where the Anchor Network's instruments were densest and the bedrock layer was most accessible. What they were doing had never been done before. Dr. Theoretical framework had described the possibility of bedrock layer recovery but had not developed the methodology. Because recovery had not been the design goal, preservation had, and the two required different approaches at the engineering level. The methodology had to be invented. It was invented, iteratively, over the first 3 years of the project, by a team that was simultaneously doing research and doing application and doing the specific kind of creative problem solving that happens when you have a clear goal and a theoretical framework and a profound absence of prior art. The Sorati, quantum physicists who had been assigned to the project under the terms of the assembly sanctions, were not welcomed easily. The human team's initial response to working alongside the people whose civilization had built the weapon that had tried to erase them was complicated, and the Commission had not pretended otherwise in its staffing documentation. But Dr. Asha Reyes had made a decision, which she communicated to her team in the project's first full staff meeting. Clearly and without softening, she said, "I know what the Sorati built. I know what it was used for. 7 civilizations, and then us. I have thought about nothing else for 4 months, and I have concluded that the people in this room who are Sorati are not the people who made those decisions, and that the work they can contribute to the recovery is real, and that I would rather recover 7 civilizations with people I find difficult than not recover them with people I find easy." She said, "We are all here for the same reason, to give back what was taken. That is enough to work with. We can work out the rest as we go." Hit like if Dr. Asha Reyes' leadership in that staff meeting is exactly the kind of human decision-making that this story is built around. Subscribe to the channel right now. Share this video with everyone you know, and stay with us, because the recovery is about to produce its first result. The first recovered civilization was the one the Sorati had designated Target 1 in their operational records. The oldest deployment, 41 years ago. The species that Salvar's analysis had described as confirming the unwriting's operational parameters. They had been called the Vish. Their homeworld had orbited a K-class star in what the Assembly's current charts labeled as uninhabited space. They had been at approximately the same development stage as humanity had been at the time of the unwriting's deployment. Faster than light capable, Assembly adjacent, but not yet members. In the process of making the kind of first contacts that eventually led to full membership, the recovery of their quantum historical record took 2 years of sustained work by the full project team, using instruments that had been rebuilt 4 times as the methodology was refined, pulling bedrock layer information from the quantum vacuum of the region of space the Vish had inhabited. What they recovered was not complete. It could not be complete. The unwriting had been deployed 41 years ago, and the quantum traces decayed over time, slowly but measurably, and 41 years of decay left gaps. But what they recovered was real, recognizable. The Vish had been a species of approximately 6 billion individuals, distributed across 3 star systems, with a social structure that the recovered data suggested was organized around extended family networks of extraordinary complexity. They had had music, the quantum traces of their acoustic environment, recovered from the matter that had been present during their civilization's active period, contained structured sound patterns that the project's musicologist, a Mirathi named Sailprune, whose crystalline wings had not been still since the first recovery results arrived, spent a month analyzing, she said, in her formal report. The Vish acoustic patterns exhibit characteristics consistent with deliberate artistic production. They made music. I cannot tell you what it sounded like. Not precisely, but I can tell you it had structure and repetition and variation, which are the universal foundations of music across every species I have studied. They had had agriculture. The quantum traces of their planetary surfaces retained the signatures of large-scale, organized biological cultivation, of the specific kind that only existed when a species had developed the cognitive and social infrastructure to plan beyond the immediate season. They had had cities. The matter in their star systems retained the quantum signatures of dense construction, of the kind of organized spatial complexity that only emerged when large numbers of individuals had chosen to live in close proximity because the benefits of proximity exceeded the costs. They had had history. Not the recovered history, but the quantum traces of which was how history was made. Moments of significance dense enough in their quantum signature to persist at the bedrock layer longer than the surrounding background. Asha Reyes stood in the project station's main analysis room when the first full recovery report was compiled, looking at the data that had been pulled from 41-year-old quantum traces in the vacuum of space, and felt something that she later wrote about in the project's formal memoir. She wrote, "We gave them back. Not everything. Not their voices, or their names, or the details of their decisions, but the fact of them. The undeniable physical proof, encoded in the bedrock of reality, that they were here, that they mattered, that the universe knew they existed even after a weapon had tried to make it forget. She wrote, Dr. Sato built a network to preserve human history. The network preserved human history, and then it did something Dr. Sato had theorized but never expected to see. It provided the instruments to recover the history that the weapon had tried to destroy in 7 other civilizations, she wrote. The bedrock layer does not lie. The quantum vacuum does not lie. The information of existence, once entangled into the structure of reality, cannot be truly destroyed, only made temporarily inaccessible. The unwriting made it inaccessible. The anchor network made it accessible again. She wrote, This is, I think, what Dr. Sato was really building. Not just a defense. A principle. The principle that history is real, and that the physical universe preserves it, and that minds with the right instruments can recover it, regardless of what anyone does, to try to make it disappear. Subscribe to the channel right now if this story is making you feel something that goes deeper than the plot. Like this video to tell us you are here for the meaning as well as the action. And share this with everyone because the principle Asha just described deserves to be heard by as many minds as possible. The recovery project ran for 47 years. Not continuously with the same team, of course. People retired and were replaced. New methodologies were developed as the instruments improved. The Serati team's initial awkward integration became, over a decade, something that the project's sociologists documented as one of the most successful, forced, collaborative relationships in assembly history. Not because the difficulty disappeared. It did not disappear. The knowledge of what the Serati had built and used remained present in every working relationship between Serati and non-Serati project members for the full 47 years. But difficulty and productivity were not the same thing, as Dr. Reyes had noted at the first staff meeting, and the project was productive in a way that demonstrated, for the Assembly's record, that productive collaboration did not require comfortable feelings, only shared commitment to the work. All 7 civilizations were recovered. Not fully. None of them were fully recovered, and the project's final report was honest about what full recovery would have required and why it was not achievable. But substantively, the Vish, the Quelati, the second target, a nomadic species who had lived in the interstellar medium of the Orion Arm, leaving quantum traces across the largest volume of space of any of the 7, the Marin, the third, who had been mathematicians, whose quantum traces contained information-dense events, consistent with the kind of concentrated intellectual effort that produced mathematical proofs. 7 civilizations in total. Each of them recovered to the degree that the bedrock layer's fading traces permitted. Each of them documented in the recovery archive that became the most referenced document in the Assembly's historical database. Within 20 years of its publication, the recovery archive did not pretend to be complete. Its introduction, written by Asha Reyes, said, What follows is what we could find, recovered from matter that did not know it was keeping a secret, pulled from the quantum vacuum by instruments built on a theoretical framework developed by a physicist who never expected to be proven right in quite this way. She wrote, Dr. Yunasato built the anchor network to protect human history. The anchor network protected human history, and then it gave us the tools to protect 7 others. I do not think she would have been surprised. I think she understood, at a level that she may not have been able to articulate in the early years of the project, that the bedrock layer was not a human resource. It was a universal one. She wrote, The universe preserves existence at the level of physics. The question is whether minds with instruments can read what the universe preserves. We built the instruments. We read Italiano. 7 civilizations are in this archive because the universe kept their records and because humans built the way to access them, and both of those things were necessary, and neither of them was sufficient alone. The Serati hegemony's reintegration into the Assembly was a long process. 30 years of sanctions, 20 years of supervised membership, 10 years of restored full standing, 60 years total from the session that had determined their fate to the session that declared the process complete. Beth Soren, the chief delegate who had stood up at the original session and asked to participate in the recovery, had been dead for 20 years by the time full standing was restored. She had spent her remaining active years on the recovery project, working alongside Asha Reyes, until her own retirement. and she had died with the knowledge that the project she had asked to join had succeeded. Her successor, a young diplomat named Vethprol, who had been a child during the original session and who had grown up in a hegemony that was slowly, painfully, relearning what it had done and what it owed, accepted the restoration of full standing with a speech that the Assembly's archive preserved in full. She said, "The Sarati hegemony built a weapon to erase history. History cannot be erased. It is written in the fabric of reality at a level below the reach of any weapon we could build. We did not know this when we built the weapon. We know it." She said, "The knowledge cost us everything we deserved to lose and gave us back something we had not deserved. A role in recovering what we destroyed. We are not forgiven for that reason. We are not asked for forgiveness. We are asked to continue the work, and we will, because the work does not end with the formal restoration of standing," she said. "The bedrock layer is still out there. The quantum traces of everything that has ever existed are still in the vacuum. The instruments the Anchor Network built are still operational. The Recovery Commission still has the mandate, and there are civilizations in the galaxy's history that were erased by forces other than the hegemony, by entropy and time and all the ordinary catastrophes that end species. And they are in the bedrock too, and they can be read," she said. "We did something terrible. The smallest redemption available is to be useful in undoing it and in continuing past it. For civilizations we did not erase, because the principle does not stop at the edge of our guilt. Hit like if Vethprol's speech is hitting you somewhere real. Subscribe to the channel right now. Share this video with everyone in your world, and stay with us, because we are coming to the end of this story, and the ending carries everything that came before it." Dr. Asha Reyes retired from the Recovery Commission at the age of 6. After 23 years of leading the project from its establishment through the successful recovery of all 7 civilizations, and the expansion of the Recovery Archive to include 17 additional historical erasures by non-Sarati causes. At her retirement, the Assembly's session chair, a Thervany elder who had been born after the original emergency session and who had grown up, knowing the story as history rather than crisis, said the things that session chairs say at retirements of significant figures. And then she said something that was not in the prepared remarks. She said, "I want to ask Dr. Reyes a question that is not about her career specifically, but about what her career represents. I want to ask because she is the person most qualified to answer, and because the answer belongs in the record." Asha nodded. The session chair asked, "Why did Dr. Sato build the Anchor Network?" "Not the technical reason, the deep reason. Why does humanity build things like this?" Asha was quiet for a moment. Tense aside, I think the honest answer is that we are a species that has broken things. We know what it feels like when something is gone and cannot be recovered. We built the network because we know what that feels like, she said. But I think there is more than that. I think Dr. Sato understood something that took me most of my career to fully appreciate, which is that history is not just what happened to us. It is what happened, period. Every species, every civilization, every mind that ever thought a thought and left a quantum trace in the bedrock, she said. The bedrock layer does not distinguish between human history and Vish history and Quelati history. It preserves all of it with the same fidelity because the physics does not have preferences. We built instruments that could access the physics, and the physics gave us everyone, she said. That is what the network really was, not a human protection system. An everything protection system built by humans. Because we happened to be the ones who developed the theory and the instruments. If the Vish had developed it first, it would have been a Vish protection system that eventually gave us back to. She said, we are the code keepers of something much older and larger than ourselves. The bedrock layer was there before any of us. It will be there after all of us. We just built the way to read it. And reading it is the responsibility of whoever has the instruments, she said. We have the instruments. We will keep reading. That is all there is to say. The retirement reception was held in the project station in the outer Sol system, where the Anchor Network's instruments were densest, and the view of the Sol system's inner planets was best from the observation deck. Asha stood at the observation window at the end of the reception, looking at the pale blue point of light that was Earth, thinking about Dr. Yunesato, who had published a paper that nobody believed and had been right about everything, thinking about the 7 civilizations in the Recovery Archive. their music, and their cities, and their mathematics, and their nomadic paths through the interstellar medium, preserved in the quantum vacuum for 41 years, until instruments built on a 1-100-40-7-year-old theoretical framework had pulled them back into the light. Thinking about Veth Soren, who had stood up in a session and asked to help. Thinking about her mother, who had said of course. Thinking about the Sorati physicist Selvar, who had warned the committee and been overridden, and who had later, in a document submitted to the Recovery Commission, described her decision to cooperate with the investigation as the first decision in her career that she was fully at peace with. Thinking about the bedrock layer, patient and vast and complete, holding the quantum records of everything that had ever existed at a depth below the reach of any weapon, waiting for minds with instruments to come and read. The instruments were built. The reading had begun. The archive was growing. The project would continue. Past her retirement. Past her lifetime. Past the lifetimes of everyone alive today. Because the bedrock layer was extensive, and the reading was slow, and the civilizations waiting to be recovered were many. Subscribe to the channel right now because this story is in its final moments, and what remains to be said is the truest and most important part. Like this video to show us you were here from the first signal to the last window, and share this with every person you know, because the ending belongs to all of us, in the bedrock layer of the quantum vacuum, beneath the threshold of every weapon ever designed, beneath the reach of every inversion wave and every erasure and every ordinary entropy that time imposed on the surface of things. The records waited, not patiently, not impatiently, without any quality that requires a mind to possess, simply there, in the way that physics is simply there. Because the universe records existence in its fundamental structure the way water records the shape of stone. Completely, continuously, without preference or prejudice, or the possibility of deliberate forgetting. Every species that had ever built a city made music, cultivated soil, studied stars, argued about beauty, loved their children, feared the dark, wondered about the future. Every one of them was in the bedrock layer. Their existence preserved in the entanglement relationships of every particle they had ever touched. The Vish were there. The Quilati were there. The Maren were there, and the four whose names the Recovery Commission had reconstructed from quantum traces, and assigned with the specific care of people who understood that naming the recovered was part of the recovery. And deeper still, further back, in the traces from before any species the Assembly had ever heard of, the marks of minds that had thought thoughts and left their quantum signatures in matter that was still, billions of years later, in the galaxy's star systems, waiting for minds with instruments, waiting for the species that had looked at the bedrock layer and understood what was written. Therein built the way to read it, not for themselves alone but for everyone, because that was what the physics implied and that was what the work required. Humanity had built the quantum anchor network to protect their own history. The network had protected their history, and then it had done what all the greatest tools did when applied with honest intelligence. It had exceeded its original purpose and become something larger than its design. It had become the instrument through which the universe's own record-keeping became legible, through which the patient, unbroken, physics-inscribed history of everyone who had ever existed could be, slowly and imperfectly, and never completely, recovered. The Sorati had built a weapon to erase history. They had deployed it against 7 civilizations and watched it work, and then deployed it against the civilization that had spent 147 years building the thing that not only resisted the weapon but reversed it. The weapon was gone. The network was still running. The instruments were still working. The archive was still growing, and in the quantum vacuum of the galaxy's vast and ancient volume, the bedrock layer held its records. Complete and patient and waiting for the reading to continue. It would continue. There was no question that it would continue. Humanity had started it, and the Assembly had joined it, and the Commission held the mandate, and the instruments would be improved, and the methodology would be refined, and the archive would grow. It would grow for as long as there were minds willing to do the work of recovery, which was the work of saying you were Eric. And the universe knew it, and we know it too. And your existence is in this archive. And the archive will not be erased because the bedrock layer cannot be erased, and we will always have the instruments to read it. That was the principle. That was what the bedrock layer meant, and what the anchor network was for, and what Dr. Sato had understood when she wrote a paper that nobody believed and spent the next 4 decades building the thing the paper described. History is real. The universe preserves it. Minds with instruments can read it. The reading is our responsibility. The responsibility does not end. The quantum anchors hold. The bedrock layer records. The instruments read. The archive grows, and everything that has ever existed is, in the deepest physics of the universe, still here. Still here. All of it. Always. Thank you for watching this story from the first deployment to the last window in the outer Sol system. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel right now, and share this with every person in your world. Because the universe is keeping records of your existence in the bedrock layer of reality. And the most human thing we have ever done is build the way to read it for everyone. The quantum anchors hold. We are still here. Everything is still here. That is what the physics says. That is what we built to prove. That is what we are. Eofin, the years after HFY retired, the quantum anchor network underwent its 7th generational upgrade, a process that the network's engineering team undertook every 20 years, whether the technology required it or not, because technology always required it. Because the instruments that read the bedrock layer were never as good as they could be, and the gap between what they currently were and what they could be was always filled by a generation of engineers who grew up wanting to fill it. The 7th upgrade tripled the network's bedrock layer resolution, which meant that civilizations the Recovery Commission had previously determined were too fated for recovery were re-evaluated against the new instrument capability. 43 of them were not too fated anymore. 43 civilizations that the original Recovery Commission had marked as beyond current instrumental reach, filed in the archive with the notation insufficient quantum trace density for recovery at this time, came up for active recovery planning when the 7th upgrade's capabilities were fully characterized. 43. The Commission's new director, a human named Dr. Kofi-san, great-great-grandnephew of Dr. Yunasato, and someone who had grown up with the Anchor Network as part of the family story rather than an institutional abstract. Assigned teams to all 43 simultaneously. Not because he had the resources for all 43 simultaneously. He did not, quite, and he knew it. But he assigned them simultaneously because waiting until the resources were perfect was how things that could be done eventually never got done. And he was the grandnephew of a woman who had understood that particular failure mode extremely well. Resources were found. Some from the Assembly's general scientific budget, which had expanded significantly since the Recovery Commission's founding because the Assembly had learned, in the 47 years since the Sarati session, that history recovery was not a specialist interest, but a galactic one. Some from private donors across 14 species, because the Recovery Archive had become the most read historical document in Assembly history within a decade of its first publication, and people who read something that mattered to them in that deep way tended to want to support its continuation. Some from the Sarati hegemony, which had been contributing funding to the Recovery Commission since its establishment, initially under sanctioned terms, and later voluntarily, because the hegemony's current generation understood that the contribution was not sufficient, but was also not nothing. And not nothing was what they had to offer. The 43 recoveries took various amounts of time, ranging from 18 months to 11 years, depending on the degree of trace decay and the complexity of the civilization's quantum signature. All 43 were completed within 20 years of the 7th upgrade's deployment. The Recovery Archive grew. It had been 7 civilizations at its founding. It was 57 at its 20th anniversary. It was 112 at the 40th, and at the 50th anniversary of the Anchor Network's operational activation, which was marked by a quiet ceremony at the Outer Sol System Station. It was 183 civilizations. 183 civilizations that the galaxy had lost and recovered. 183 sets of quantum traces pulled from the bedrock layer and translated into the most comprehensive historical documentation that physics permitted. Each one different. Each one irreplaceable. Each one in the archive because minds with instruments had decided that the recovery was worth the effort. At the 50th anniversary ceremony, Dr. Kofi Sato gave a short speech that his great-great-grandaunt would have recognized in its structure, which was short and precise, and said the most important thing without decorating it. He said, "Dr. Sato built the network to protect us. The network protected us. and showed us how to protect everyone. Everyone is now 183 civilizations, and growing. The bedrock layer has more, still waiting. We will keep going, he said. That is the Anchor Network. That is what it has always been. The instrument through which the universe's record-keeping becomes something minds can engage with. We built the instrument. The universe built the record. Together, they are the archive, he said. The archive is not complete. It will not be complete in our lifetimes or the lifetimes of our successors. The bedrock layer is old and vast, and the reading is slow, and the instruments will always need improving, and there will always be more to recover than the current team can address, he said. That is not a problem. That is a project. The longest project any civilization has ever taken on. Because the bedrock layer is as old as the universe, and the universe has been making records since its first moment, he said. We will read as much of it as we can. We will improve the instruments and train the next generation and expand the commission and grow the archive and pass it forward to the people who come after us. The same way every generation of this project has passed it forward since Dr. Sato published a paper that nobody believed. He said, she was right. The bedrock layer is real. The records are there. The reading is possible, and the reading is our responsibility, not because we were assigned it, but because we built the instruments, and that is how responsibility works. It goes to whoever has the capability to meet it. The ceremony ended. The teams returned to their work. The instruments were running. The archive was growing, and in the quantum vacuum of a galaxy, too old and too vast for any current mind to fully comprehend, the bedrock layer held its records, patient and complete, and waiting for the reading to continue. It would continue it. Always audit. Always would. That was not a promise or a hope. It was a description of what the people with the instruments had decided. Generation by generation, to keep doing, keep reading, keep recovering, keep building the archive that said, to every civilization that had ever existed in this galaxy, you wear air, and the universe knew it, and we know it, and you are in this record, and the record will not be lost. Will not be lost because the bedrock layer cannot lose it. Will not be lost because the instruments will keep improving. Will not be lost because there will always be people who understand that the recovery is worth the effort and that nothing is where you start and that you keep going from there. The quantum anchors hold. The bedrock layer records. The instruments read. The archive grows, and in the deepest structure of reality, below every weapon and every entropy and every erasure that anything has ever attempted, existence is preserved. Preserved by physics. Read by minds, shared with everyone. That is the principle. That is what the Anchor Network is for. That is what Dr. Yuna Sato understood when she built it, and what 147 years of engineers and physicists and historians and diplomats and Sorati collaborators have been demonstrating ever since. History is real. The universe keeps it. We read it. And reading it, together, is the most important thing minds with instruments have ever done with their capability and their time. We are still here. All of us. Every civilization that has ever existed in this galaxy is still here, in the bedrock, waiting to be read, waiting to be known, waiting for the archive entry that says, "Yo wear a rail and the universe remembers, and so do we." That is the whole story. That is what the quantum anchors protect, and what the Recovery Commission recovers, and what the archive holds. The fact of existence, written in physics, read by minds, shared with everyone, never erased, not ever. Not by anything. The bedrock holds. Thank you for listening to this story from first signal to last archive entry. Please like this video right now, subscribe to this channel, and share this with every person in your world who deserves to know what it means to build something that says you were array, and it mattered, and we will not let it be forgotten. De quanto mancar sol. The reading continues. We are still here. That is everything. Long after the 50th anniversary ceremony, in a lab built into the skin of an asteroid in the outer Sol system, a young engineer named Rio Vasil sat at a console that was running the 8th generation of bedrock layer instruments. She was 26 years old. She had grown up reading the Recovery Archive the way previous generations had grown up reading myths and sacred texts. with a specific quality of attention that stories reserve for things that feel true at a level deeper than factual. She had come to the project not because she was assigned to it and not because her family had been part of it, though her family had been part of it, but because she had read about the Vish at the age of 9 and had decided that this was the work she wanted to do. The Vish had been her entry point. The civilization, the project, recovered first, whose quantum traces included music and cities and the evidence of agriculture, and whose recovery had taken 2 years and produced 3 volumes of the archive's most read material. She had read about them and she had thought, at 9 years old, with the specific clarity that children sometimes achieve before the world has taught them that. Clarity is complicated. They were real and now I know it, and that matters. It mattered the same way at 26. It mattered the same way when she was running instruments that were 3 generations more capable than the ones that had pulled the Vish traces from the vacuum, capable of reading civilizations that those original instruments would have found invisible. She had found one 3 weeks ago, at a depth in the bedrock layer that no prior instrument had been able to reach. In a region of space that the assembly's charts listed as simply old, the 8th generation instruments had detected a quantum signature. Not a familiar quantum signature, not the kind that the Recovery Commission's pattern library could match to any known civilization. A new one, older than any civilization currently in the archive. Older than any civilization the bedrock layer had previously yielded. She had been running the analysis for 3 weeks. She had slept approximately as much as a person sleeping for hours a night could sleep, which was not much, and she had eaten the way people ate when they were doing something that made eating feel like an interruption. And tonight, at 03 for 7 hours Seoul Standard Time, the analysis completed. She sat with the completion report for a long time. Then she picked up her communication device and called the commission director, Dr. Kofi Sato, who was 61 years old and who had been woken at 03 for 7 hours before for things of various levels of importance, and who answered with the equanimity of someone who had decided long ago that the call at 0347 was usually worth answering. She said, "I found something." He said, "Tell me." She said, "It is the oldest civilization in the archive by approximately 400 million years. It is not related to any currently known species. The bedrock traces suggest a level of technological development that our current models do not have a category for. And there is one more thing," she said. "The traces include quantum information structures that are not passive. They are not just the residue of existence. They are structured. They are organized. They are encoding something, deliberately, at a depth in the bedrock layer that they had to have built specifically to reach." She said, "They left a message 400 million years ago. In a civilization whose quantum traces are so old that they should barely be readable. Something decided to leave a message at the bedrock level where it would persist until someone with the right instruments came to find it." Dr. Kofi Sato was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do we know what it says?" She said, "Not yet. The decoding will take time, but the structure is coherent, and the encoding is systematic, and I believe, with the instruments we have, we can read it." He was quiet again. She waited, the way she had learned to wait for the bedrock layer to yield its information, with the patient certainty that what was there would be found given enough time and the right instruments. He said, "You are about to decode a message left 400 million years ago by a civilization we did not know existed, from minds they did not know would exist. Using physics they understood deeply enough to trust that the bedrock layer would preserve it until someone came." She said yes. He said, "They built something that lasted 400 million years to give us a message." She said, "Yes." He said, "Start the decoding. I'll be there in 6 hours." He was there He brought 3 other physicists, 2 historians, and the commission's philosopher, who had been saying for 20 years that the bedrock layer probably contained things they had not yet imagined, and who arrived with the expression of someone who has been right for a very long time and is finally about to be proven so. The decoding took 11 days. 11 days of sustained work by the full team, using every capability the 8th generation instruments had. Following the encoding structure's logic, the way you followed a complex argument, step by step, each step opening the next. On the 11th day, the message resolved. It was not in any language. It was not in any symbolic framework. It was a structure, a comprehension architecture in the sense that the architect had used those words. A way of seeing a relationship that conveyed meaning without requiring shared language. The meaning was simple. It was this. We were eri. We knew you would come, eventually. Not you, specifically. The minds that would eventually develop the instruments to read the bedrock layer. We trusted the physics to preserve this until those minds arrived. We trusted the physics because the physics is trustworthy. We left this here because we wanted the minds that came after us to know that we were here and that we thought about them and that we trusted them to come. We trust you. Read well. Build well. Leave your own messages in the bedrock for the minds that come after you. The commissioned philosopher sat in silence for 3 minutes after the message resolved. Tense aside, 400 million years ago. Something understood the bedrock layer well enough to use it as a message medium, trusted that future minds would develop the instruments to read it, and left a message that says, "We see you across 400 million years, and we trust you." She said, "This changes the nature of the project, not the work. The work is the same. But what the work is for, we thought we were recovering lost civilizations. We are also part of a correspondence that has been running since the beginning of intelligent life in this galaxy, carried on in the bedrock layer. Message to message, civilization to civilization, across timescales that make our history look like an afternoon," she said. And humanity built the instruments to read it. And the first message we decoded was, "We trust you to read well and build well and leave your own messages." Dr. Kofi Sato looked at the resolved message on the display for a long time. Then he said, quietly, to the room and to his great-great-grandaunt, who had published a paper nobody believed, and to the bedrock layer that had held this message for 400 million years, and to the civilization that had put it there. "We will. The quantum anchors hold. The bedrock records. The instruments read. The correspondence continues, and in the deepest structure of reality, across 400 million years and more, minds reach for other minds through the physics that connects everything that has ever existed. We built the way to rate it. We are reading. We will leave our own messages in the bedrock for the minds that come after us, trusting the physics and trusting them, the way something trusted us 400 million years before we existed. The lung trust. The oldest lung trust, running through the bedrock layer of the universe, from the first minds that understood it to the last minds that will ever exist, an unbroken thread of we were here and we thought of you and we trust you to continue. We are continuing. That is the story. That is all the story needs to be. Thank you for watching from the very first deployment to this last message. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel right now, and share this with everyone you know. The bedrock holds. The correspondence continues. We are still here. So is everything.